collaboration with the Cyprus Mail. This is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
Coming up this week, a stark message from a climate expert.
What we measure in this ice cores in Antarctica is indeed representative of the condition we had 800,000 years ago. And the conclusions are frightening. We have more CO2 than any time over much more now than 1 million years. That, you cannot dispute that. These are facts.
And we discuss how yoga can change your life.
What we're aiming to do is encourage people to find that in their life, because it's much better to prevent things by staying well than it is to fix things when they're broken.
Earlier this week saw the launch of the new research centre into climate change and atmospheric science at the Cyprus Institute, and the keynote speaker talking about climate change from doubt to evidence was Michel Jarraud. He's the Secretary-General Emeritus of the World Meteorological Organization, and he joins us now. Michel, let's start a little bit with the work of the WMO, World Meteorological Organization, and then come on to what you were actually talking about on Monday.
Okay, as you know, there are many specialized agencies in the United Nations system, some dealing with health, with food security, education, and the WMO is the one which is dealing with meteorology, hydrology and climate issue from a scientific perspective. So essentially it coordinates all the observation networks which allow us to talk about climate change now. It coordinates the work of all the national weather services of the planet, like the one you have in Cyprus. So the WMO, more than 40 years ago, drew the alarm bell on the increase of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. At the time, you may remember, some people were worried about nuclear winter because it was still very much the Cold War context. But already at the time, we spotted that the concentration of CO2 in particular and a few other greenhouse gases were increasing significantly. And because they are greenhouse gases, the net result was bound to be some increase in the temperature and a number of other consequences. So WMO organized already in the 80s and 90s and 2003 World Climate Conferences to try to set the basis to know what do we know about climate change. Can we provide decision makers with authoritative information on that? So in particular, a big decision was to create what is known now as the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. You might have heard about it. It makes this scientific evaluation of scientific knowledge about climate change every 6-7 years. There are big reports. It was actually created by WMO and the United Nations Environment Programme in 1988, so more than 30 years ago. And it has produced now 5 evaluation reports, and every report delivered stronger and stronger messages. In the first report, there was just some suspicion that, yes, we saw the concentration of greenhouse gases increasing, but what we were observing was much smaller than the natural variability. But every 6 years, the report came with stronger and stronger messages.
Okay, so we have the science now, we have the
science.
evidence.
Yes.
We also have an awful lot of people who say it's all a load of rubbish still, and they come up with counter-arguments. And I presume that's why you chose to talk about from doubt to evidence, because the evidence is there. Mm-hmm. Why do you think it is that a fair proportion of the global population says it's tosh?
Well, you see, one of the difficulties is that the weather can be quite different from day to day. You can have cold winters, you can have warm winters, you can have dry spells, and people say, oh, what you are talking about is actually much smaller than what we have seen in the past. And the memory of people tend to be pretty short, actually. So people say, why do we bother about that? Because we have seen worse in the past, and they focus on what happened locally. Actually, when you talk about when we talk about a 2 degree or 3 degree increase in the global temperature, people feel it's very small. But you should remember that the difference between an ice age, when most of Europe was under ice, and the period we have now, which is a warm period, is only about 6 degrees globally. So 2 degrees additional warming is significant, because on top of it, we are not in an ice age. We are living in an already warm period. So on top of it, we are going to add at least 2 degrees if we are successful with the Paris Agreement. But if we follow the business as usual, that is, if we do nothing special, which unfortunately tends to be what's happening now, we are going to add, the trend is towards 3 to 4, possibly 6 additional degrees. So this is very, very significant.
Let me ask you about the idea that also you see, particularly on social media, the naysayers, the climate change deniers, whatever you want to call them, that we have, in a sense, a graph that goes up and down in terms of a circularity almost of climate conditions that goes from ice age to warm to ice age to warm and so on. They are the people who point out, for example, I think I read recently that Greenland lost more of its ice between, I don't know, a couple of decades in the early 20th century than it has in the last 40 years. So how can you explain to people that isn't maybe necessarily just the normal pattern of things?
By the way, this is, I know some people are claiming that, but this is not correct. And you see, this is one of the problems with the deniers or the skeptics, is that they take a few observations out of context, local information, and they draw general conclusions about it. So to counter all this false information is actually a big challenge for scientists. And some of the deniers were actually supported by lobbies, who, for example, the oil lobby or some other lobbies, the coal lobby, and who don't want to listen to the facts because it may be in the short term against their industrial interest. So it's very challenging for the scientists who want to stick to the facts, because they would have to spend a lot of time in communication at the expense sometimes of the real research. So one has to find the right balance. It's very important to communicate the right thing, but at the same time, it's also important to still continue to do research.
How easy is it to do definitive research into something like climate change? Because again, how do you quantify it?
Well, there are a few things, and this is some of the things I explained in my conference, is, for example, there are a few things which we know for sure. For example, the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere are the highest we have had for more than 800,000 years. How do we know that? We know that with great precision because you can drill ice cores in Antarctica and you can go back, because the ice has accumulated over hundreds of thousands of years, you can go back 800,000 years, and probably in the future we shall be able to go back even more than 1 million years. So you analyze the little air bubble which are trapped in the ice, and this air is fossil air. It's the air which was trapped at the time the snow was falling.
So you can measure the carbon dioxide.
We can measure with incredible accuracy, just the same accuracy as the one we have now. And because the CO2 mixes pretty quickly in the atmosphere, it means that what we measure in these ice cores in Antarctica is indeed representative of the condition we had 800,000 years ago. And the conclusions are frightening. We have more CO2 than any time over, much more now than 1 million years. That, you cannot dispute that. These are facts. And then the other people who say, but we've got ice ages in the past, we've got warm periods. Yes, indeed, but they were happening because of other parameters. The way the Earth, is orbiting around the Sun is not constant, and this explained in large part the transition from ice age to other warm period like we have now. But this is happening over tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years.
Whereas what we've got now
is happening over
the
2
last
generations.
Yeah,
and the children which are born now will be only 81 years old at the end of this century. So they will see a completely different planet if we don't take proper action now. The skeptics don't care about that. They care about short-term perspective. You see, and unfortunately, even at the political level, we have more and more people, political level, also private industry, who look at very short-term perspective. If you want to deal with climate change, one should take a much longer timescale perspective.
What's the answer? Were you able to come up with the things that we should be considering doing?
Well, actually, these IPCC reports, which I mentioned earlier, every report of the IPCC is a huge amount of work. It's about 3 volumes, 1,000 pages each volume, and they consider all aspects. They consider, first volume is, where are we now? Where are we now? What is the state of knowledge about current situation? The second volume is about projection. What is likely to happen over the next 100 years? And for some issues like sea level rise, maybe even longer. And the third volume is about response strategies. What can we do about it? Because you see, climate is such a complex issue. It's interaction between ocean, atmosphere. You mentioned Greenland, Antarctica. It's what we call the cryosphere, the melting of the glacier. So that there's a biosphere. It's interaction between many, many elements. And you cannot have just one solution. You may remember some years ago we were very much talking about the ozone hole and the ozone depletion. And in a sense, it was a success story because we understood scientifically what was causing that. The industry was ready to come with replacement products to replace the one which are causing the ozone destruction. So that was easy because it was essentially one cause, and then you need to implement one solution. Climate change is much more complicated. You cannot solve it by addressing only one issue. You have to address all the things. The elephant in the room, indeed, is the CO2. But you should not forget about other greenhouse gases like methane, like what we call nitrous oxide, and a few others. But the elephant in the room is CO2. So we need to decrease significantly the emissions of CO2. But they come from different sources. Energy is one of them. Electricity production, transport, cement production, and methane is also produced by agriculture,
particularly cattle farming.
Cattle and rice production. These two are major contribution to methane emission. And you have also nitrous oxide, which has a significant contribution from agriculture. So agriculture is part of the problem, but if it's done properly, can be part of the solution as well. So we need to look at all these aspects. It doesn't come from only one single action. Often your colleague journalists ask me a question, what would be the one action that you would recommend? I said, no, that's a wrong question, because
you have to look at it holistically.
No one single action can do it. You have to look at all kinds of aspects, not to waste energy, to have transport, to have more renewable energy production, but also at the same time in colder countries to have better insulated houses, to have better ways to produce for industry to emit less things. If you need to
more trees to absorb the carbon dioxide.
Yeah, many ways. And you know, it's really a typical thing where small rivers eventually end up in a big in a big stream, because you need to take many action at the individual level, at the industry level, regulatory action at the government level, where you probably need to, I know some people don't hate this word, some economists hate this word, you need to subsidize some of this green thing. So you need to look at all these aspects together, and it's only by looking at the complexity of the issue that you can make real progress.
What would you say are the biggest things that you need to debunk when you're talking about the doubters and coming up with evidence? I mean, are there particular things that people tend to latch onto when they're saying this is a lot of rubbish, this is not happening? Yeah. What are the most, if you like, accepted and popular misconceptions? And what's the evidence that debunks them?
One of the favorite ways for the skeptics or deniers, whatever you want to call them, is to say things which are not proven, which are wrong. And it's very difficult, because if you have I've participated in many debates on TV, radio, on this, and often time is very short. So to say something wrong is very easy and very short. To explain is not so easy because explanation are scientific explanation and they can take a little bit more time to do it properly. So what I would advise at least decision makers in high position is a bit like what Greta Thunberg is saying. Please, can you listen to the scientists? That is, don't and this is why the IPCC was created, is to put together the best possible knowledge. What is the knowledge on the state of scientific knowledge about climate change, and it's put in a way which helps decision makers to make the right decision, but decision makers have to read that. So there are different 3,000 pages. No head of state will read 3,000 pages. So there are summary for decision makers, maybe 100 pages. It's still too long. There are executive summary of this summary for decision makers. So you can have these messages at different level. But it's also true that scientists, and I must plead guilty for my own community, have not in the past paid enough attention to the communication issue. So indeed, communication is essential. Partnership between the media and the scientific community are essential. For my own organization, the World Meteorological Organization, there's been very successful development in such partnership with the people who present, for example, weather forecasts on TV, because they are, in many countries, better known than many politicians. They appear.
Everybody's interested in the weather, but a lot of people mix up climate and the weather.
But these people sometimes can get this kind of message to explain what is the difference between weather and climate. Climate being a sort of average of weather over long periods, and to get a few key messages about it. Now, what is helping us now actually is there's been very significant scientific progress on what we call attribution science. In other words, you see there was a big heat wave in Europe again. Is it due to climate change? The answer is yes. In the sense that without climate change, it would have been almost impossible to have this kind of recurrence of heat waves in Europe. You can also, you cannot attribute some of the hurricanes explicitly to climate change, because hurricanes are the result of many things. But if you remember some years ago, there was a devastating typhoon. It's the same as hurricane in the Pacific. Typhoon in the Pacific hitting Philippines. It was called Haiyan. Many thousands of people died. They didn't die because of the wind. They died because, associated with the typhoon, you had a sort of surge of water which flooded the coastal area, and people just drowned because of that. You cannot say that the typhoon itself was due to climate change, although with climate change we know there will be more frequent hurricanes, typhoons, and in particular more frequent very intense one. But what you can say is because of climate change, the level of the ocean has been rising significantly. Near Philippines, where the typhoon hit Philippines, it was more than 35 centimeters over the last 50 years. You know what it means? It means that the impact of the same hurricane 50 years ago would have been much less, simply mechanically because the sea level was lower. So this is a direct attribution, and now we can attribute many of this damage to climate change. So climate change is not only for the future. The signal now is getting so strong that it is already impacting people now. It is impacting, I mentioned sea level rise is impacting many parts of the west coast of Africa with coastal erosion, many islands which are already much more threatened by water.
We're all actually, let's be honest, Michelle, we're all going to see an impact somehow on our lives, even in the next decade. But the real problem is going to be for the younger generation, because their lives are going to be changed completely. We have, unfortunately, to stop it there, but it's been a pleasure talking to you. Michel Jarraud, Secretary General Emeritus of the World Meteorological Organization, who gave a lecture earlier this week called Climate Change from Doubt to Evidence.
Get in touch with the Cyprus News Digest by emailing cyprusnewsdigest@gmail.com.
In collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Charalambous.
The biggest achievement of Crime Stoppers has been the ability of the public to be able to give information about crime anonymously.
There's no way I could have kept prostituting without the drugs. There's no way I could have had my body used like a public toilet, because that's actually what prostitution is.
And then the fourth series I started 3 days after I'd won the Oscar, so the whole of the Monarch of the Glen experience was all interplatted with the Gosford Park Oscar experience.
I was working with Ronnie James Dio, and David was going to reform Whitesnake in 2003.
Cyprus was chosen because Cyprus is a stable, peaceful and secure place.
We have to really look closely. What are we doing with children? What are we doing with adolescents? And what are we doing with adults that can help them move into a more literate situation?
The ones that I'm proudest of are the ones that were true discoveries, where we found something we didn't know existed.
There's some good news this week on the animal front. On Wednesday, the Cabinet approved a host of new measures on animal welfare. They're part of a series of amendments that have been long called for on the animal welfare law. It'll be forbidden to keep a pet permanently tied up, or to keep or isolate a dog or cat on balconies and roofs. There'll also be a significant increase in financial penalties, along with the possibility of imprisonment in the event of a conviction for abuse or neglect. At the same time, a ban on keeping marine mammals like dolphins, whales or seals in captivity at aquariums or in artificial tanks is also being introduced. The amendments approved by the Cabinet now have to be submitted to the House of Representatives to become law.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
Christopher Gladwell is an experienced meditator, mindfulness coach, psychotherapist, clinical hypnotherapist and a teacher of yogic psychology and well-being. He's a regular visitor to Cyprus, where he runs workshops and retreats. Now, he did have a workshop planned for the beginning of November, but force majeure has meant that he's got to change the dates, and they'll now be taking place next March. However, I caught up with Christopher when he was on the island a couple of weeks ago and asked him about the Maha Yoga that he'll be teaching.
Well, Maha means great, yeah, and yoga, it means union, so it's the great union. So it's the deep recognition in our viscera, in our guts, in our heart, in our mind, in every cell of the body, about the unified flow of life that we all are, and we're landing in that. So we're stepping out of the biologically created illusion of being a separate life form. I mean, that sounds crazy, right, for a start, sure. But if you just breathe in, if you're listening to this, breathe in, take a deep, slow, long breath in and feel that breath, okay? And as you do that and breathe out, I want you to recognise that wind that comes into your body, because it's the wind, has been over the Troodos, it's been over the mountains, it's come from across the sea somewhere, it's been breathed in by millions of creatures before you and was made by plants. And it goes to every single cell in your body. So the idea, the biologically created imperative that somehow we are separate from everything else is a complete illusion. But you can't just cognitively undo that. You've got to practically undo it. So Maha Yoga is about unweaving that illusion so we can land more fully in being completely and freely who we are.
It sounds a bit like you're trying to get people to ground themselves in the earth.
I think that's part of it. I think landing in and as the earth, because this body is made of earth and water, and sunlight. We've got all these. This makes us up. We are all that. The heat produced in the mitochondria in the body. And the mitochondria, if you don't know that, are the sort of little parts inside nearly all the cells in the body that make energy. And that energy is made of glucose, and that glucose, whatever you've eaten, originally came from plants. I mean, cows are just 100% recycled grass. So originally that came from grass, and that came from sunlight. So that energy that comes from the sunlight goes through plants, ends up in your body, and comes out as energy and heat.
How do you train people, though, who've never done this before, to, in a sense, relax and give way to accept?
Relaxation is a huge part of it. And relaxation is not it's not what I call a human given. It's not something that we can just do, especially in the modern world. So we do have to, I have to train people in how to relax. And on the Friday night, we're doing a kind of really nice, deep relaxation practice. So people come. I'm calling it a teddy bear nidra. Nidra just is a yoga word for sleep, all right? But I'm going to talk people through a very deep relaxation practice on the Friday night. I come in quite late into Larnaca, so I've told people to bring their teddy bears, and we can just get in, lie down, and go deep into that state of relaxation, which is so liberating in terms of, amongst everything else, most diseases of the modern world, we're talking cancer, cardiac conditions, osteoarthritis, so many conditions are related to inflammatory cascades in the body.
Stress.
But it comes down to stress. That's right. And stress is a natural outcome of the experience of being a separate life form, because it's you against the universe. Yeah? So if you can relax into life, that stress doesn't come up in the same way.
So this teddy bear how long is that going to take? I mean, people are going to say, all right, a Friday evening, that sounds cool. What is it, an hour, 2 hours?
90 minutes.
90 minutes.
90 minutes.
Then the problem, of course, if you're successful in getting them to deeply relax, is how long it takes them to sort of get up and go away.
It takes a bit of time sometimes, yeah. We'll aim to have them out the door within 30 minutes after that, if we can.
Okay.
But conversations need to happen, and people need to talk about what's going on for them and that kind of thing. And but that's going to be the evening on the Friday evening.
And then the weekend? The
weekend on the Saturday, I aim to get people right into their bodies. So we're going to I teach a systematic and educational approach to being alive in the body. Again, a lot of people's body is kind of like a brain taxi. It gets the brain to the office and back, and it's a shame because actually it's all the intelligence that we so honour actually arises out of the flesh. And so we're going deep into the flesh with awareness through movement, through intelligent movement, so people can get strong and well and stay well. The physical practices are a way of staying well. And I studied in Indian medicine, Ayurveda, and Chinese medicine as well. And once upon a time, Chinese doctors, it's not so true now, but Chinese doctors didn't get paid if their clients got ill because they'd failed at their job. Because the job of traditional Asian flow medicines
is preventive, isn't it?
It's preventative. It's keeping people well. So what you eat, how you move, how you think, how you breathe, how you find space inside your own brain, so you're not caught up in thought process and that kind of thing. All those aspects of practice are ways of staying well, really, ultimately, like really well. So what we're aiming to do is encourage people to find that in their life, because it's much better to prevent things by staying well than it is to fix things when they're broken. That's painful and expensive.
So on the Saturday you'll be doing that. Is that an all-day thing?
We'll be doing that probably for about 3 or 4 hours on the Saturday morning, and then we'll be doing some breath work and some meditative practice, so taking people into different aspects of practice in terms of meditation, working with breathing, because you can do a huge amount can be done with breathing. And I'm a breath worker as well, so we can go into deep soothing practice where we can teach people to de-stress within 9 breaths. There's some incredible practice that is possible, and it's possible to do some breath work which opens people into the sort of I don't know how to describe it. It's difficult to use words, but I'm going to say the sort of fractal creative force of the universe. It kind of opens your brain up into, because what happens is our sense fields are very filtered. Very, very finely filtered. In a body, we have about 100 million bits of information coming through the visual field at any second. 100 million bits per second of information coming in, and around about 10 to 20 million bits per second through all the other sense fields. And what's filtered down into consciousness for us is about 40 bits per second, or something like that. I mean, it's a huge difference. So our version of what we call reality, which is lumps of stuff, subject objects and things like that, is actually very, very filtered. And it's a huge vibrational web. And the sort of human experience of that is substantially limiting. When we can open up a little bit more, intelligently open up to that, because we don't want to do it in a way that leads people to be unhappy or scared, because those are possibilities and we don't want that. So we're finding a systematic, very gentle, very beautiful way to open up into a much bigger experience of what it is to be alive, a much more wholesome experience of what it is to be alive.
And on the Sunday?
And on the Sunday we're going to do more of the same.
Yeah. Where can people find out more? You must have a website. Where are all the details?
Yeah, it's ChristopherGladwell.com. That's Gladwell is Gladwell, Gladwell.com.
Christopher Gladwell, whose November workshop has had to be cancelled, but it has been rescheduled and will now take place from the 20th to the 22nd of March. next year. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.